Excellencies, laureates, distinguished guests, dear friends, good morning and welcome to this closing session of World Water Week 2016. I think we have had another good year. This year we have more than 3,100 participants and still counting from more than 120 countries, and you have come from far away. I met a participant the other day who came from New Zealand, and I think that is far as you can go from Sweden and Argentina, so most welcome from all over the world. Having said that, I guess that must mean that we're doing something right to get people from those faraway places. It has been a packed week. We had seminars, sessions, social events, many meetings on the sidelines. When I walk the town, I see a number of meetings taking place nighttime after the official program has ended there, and that is good. I think that is also what the World Water Week is all about, to come together, to join and also share experience, not only to convene and attend sessions. And also by this networking, I think we also get the most recent buzz what is on in the water world. And that really pleases me, because the World Water Week should be a meeting place. And we hope and we also work hard that it should be the annual meeting in the world for water and development. But now, this morning, we will conclude this World Water Week, and we have a great lineup of speakers. We will hear from Abdelham Lafi, Dr. Lafi, from Morocco's High Commissioner for the COP22, and from the Minister for Water, Forestry and Fight Against Desertification in Morocco. I'm very pleased that Dr. Lafi has come to Stockholm to be part of our discussions ahead of your most important conference upcoming in Marrakesh in November. We will then hear a number of reflections from the interregional dialogues. You know, we have had Africa Day, we had Asia Day, and Latin America Day. And Pablo Bereciartua, Undersecretary for Water in Argentina, you're most welcome. And I'm eager to learn and hear from you what the reflections are when you had the interregional dialogue the other day, combining what we have found in these different regional days. Dr. Torkel Jørn Clausen, I think most of you know Torkel. He's the chairperson of our scientific program committee of the World Water Week, and he will give us the main conclusions from the seminars, the full-day seminars, 8 of them that we have had at this Water Week. And then also Robert Boss will present the Workshop Poster Award. We will have a break. I hope there is some coffee outside. We'll come back, and then we will have the Swedish Minister for Environment, Karolina Skog, addressing us, followed by a reporting back session. We had a number of rapporteurs, teams of rapporteurs, maybe you have seen them spying around during this week, entering into every session that we've had. Every single session has had a rapporteur. You didn't notice it, but that was the case. And they will, after the break, also tell us what their takeaway are from the week. And we will also hear another group that is reflections from a number of seasoned experts on water and development. But before asking some of our colleagues to this stage, I would like to give some few reflections on my own. I think when we started off, we thought last year we had those great global decisions: disaster risk reduction, finance for development, sustainable development goals, Paris Agreement. Now it's time to go from the global to the local level, and that has been emphasized all the week around. And I think that is absolutely essential if we are to achieve not only the global goals, but also what came out of Paris and also eventually from Marrakesh. We will need city and local leaderships, businesses, civil society at the local level to really implement what has been decided on the global scale. We need to learn from each other to create smart and viable, sustainable partnerships. Water is also too important to just be kept within our community, water community. It's a central part of the entire society, and that is what we are here also to enter into in the future. Now, I would next like to turn and invite Karin Lexén, who not only runs the World Water Week, is also Director of International Policy at CV, and she will share with us, or you will share with us, Civi's takeaways from this week. Please, Kari.
So thank you, Torgny. And this is a trial to capture a little bit of maybe the political processes that we have been following this week. And as Torgny was saying, and as we all know, last year was the big year of decision-making. A lot of global agreements, and as Torgny said, on development, disaster risk reduction, finance, and climate. And throughout the week, we have said, and it's worthwhile saying again, that we set the bar high, and now it's time to deliver. And during the last World Water Weeks, and also many other forums that we have been taking part in, we have focused on getting water into the SDGs and to follow the progress of water in the SDGs once decided, and also to continue push for the integration of water into the climate discourse. This week was an opportunity to start taking stock of our progress towards these goals and towards the climate agreement that was adopted in Paris last year. We have also had the opportunity, as Torgny said, to learn from each other, to innovate together, and to find partnership. Yesterday we hosted a scene-setting event on post-2030 agenda and on the Agenda 2030, and the climate agreement. And we intend to follow up next year's World Water Week and continue to build on the recommendations and perspectives of this diverse community that the World Water Week represents. Because it's important to acknowledge that we have a water goal, but we have not come far enough with regards to water's integration in the climate agenda or in the wider SDGs. So, while we must continue to focus on water as a carrier to achieve Agenda 2030 and to push for a better integration of water into the upcoming COP discussion, we must simultaneously focus on implementation. And this has been echoed loudly throughout the week. Also, the specific challenges facing Africa in decades to come will require nothing less than an African water revolution based on green water. Integration of water in the climate discourse has not been forgotten. In fact, it's unavoidable when faced with those in the greatest need. Nor has the focus on concrete action, partnership, and coherence wavered. Action has been the part of the heart of the week. Agenda 2030 presents us with a complex yet important set of challenges. Navigating these challenges through the lens of water and factoring in strategies to mitigate and adapt to climate change will facilitate coordinated action. The Climate National Determined Contributions, called the NDCs, can be an important vehicle through which to integrate the climate and water agendas. And fresh water is already the top priority for a vast majority of countries that have included adaptation in their NDCs. It will be important to closely follow these processes, to share knowledge and look for opportunities to work together. In 2018, the NDCs will be reviewed and hopefully taken one step further. Here we need to start engaging now in order to give water its adequate place in this review process. So we believe that water must take the center stage when reviewing towards 2018. The national agenda plans for Agenda 2030 and the climate also need to be implemented in a coherent manner. In fact, we believe that our ability to effectively coordinate strategies to achieve the SDGs and to implement the NDCs will provide an indication of our likelihood to succeed. And as has already been said, global decisions need to be translated into the local level. Cities and local municipalities can lead the way, implementing sustainable solutions that build climate and resilience into urban development. As we now start to turn towards COP22 in Marrakesh, we must again strive to keep water at the center of discussions. We know, and that is something that is gaining more and more acknowledgement, that water resources is very important also for mitigation to climate change. And as I said, it has been prioritized in the NDCs on adaptation. But we also need climate funding to take water resources into consideration. Implementing Agenda 2030 as well as the Paris Agenda will require investments, finance, domestic and international, technology change and transfer and capacity building. We welcome the Global Climate Action Partnership as an innovative way to include non-state actors in the Climate Convention and urge for a strong emphasis on water. We also welcome representatives of the high-level panel on water, the Sherpas, to this week's World Water Week. This panel is helping to give water the political prominence that it deserves. It is working to address the question of water value, because if we don't value water correctly, it will be very difficult to use it efficiently. It is driving engagement, ownership of water to the highest governmental level, specifically the heads of state and hopefully also finance minister, but must also engage with less traditional actors, young professionals, innovators, and entrepreneurs. We need key decision makers, technicians, and outside-the-box thinkers to help dissolve the barriers between the different sustainable development goals and between climate and development. We look forward to the launch of the action plan of the high-level panel in New York in September. As we have heard throughout the week, also from the Sherpas, working with non-state actors, civil society, business, mayors, local leaders, and not the least, young professionals, will be essential to achieve the Agenda 2030. Solutions need to be long-term, yet iterative, and we must allow, in fact, encourage innovation, collaboration, and transformative approaches. We will soon turn towards the reporting back session, but let me finish by saying, don't wait to be perfect. Be ambitious, allow failure, learn from your mistakes, and share your learnings to inspire and assist others. Don't reinvent the wheel. Instead, reinforce, build upon, and develop existing initiatives together. Continue to advocate for water in whatever capacity you can. And hopefully, together, we can ensure that fresh water receives the attention it deserves. Thank you.
Thank you, Karin. It now gives me great pleasure to invite to stage Dr. Abdeladim Lafi, who is High Commissioner for the 22nd Conference of the Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP22 in short. And Dr. Lafi will speak to us on the issue of, at the Conference of Global Policy, why water matter in the implementation of Agenda 2030 and the Paris Agreement. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellencies, in the course of a long process of negotiations, meetings, conferences, since the end of the 60s, the international community raises the question of our development models and how they can be appropriate with sustainable manner to deal with the natural resources, whether renewable they are or not, and the ability of our development to preserve the environment against different damages. Since the meeting of the Club de Rome in 1968, with reference to a dated document, the limits of the growth, and through the first big meeting of the United Nations Conference on the environment in Stockholm in 1972, we can consider that it was a real turning point in the sense that it was the beginning of a new concept, the concept of sustainable development. 20 years later, in the Earth Summit of Rio in 1992, the international community agreed that sustainability requires a strong linkage between the economical growth, the preservation of the environmental balance of ecosystems, and the social aspects. 3 major conventions of Rio, climate change, biodiversity, and desertification, these are the 3 major items dealing with specific terms. But despite the efforts to reverse the regressive trend, the results were far from the objectives. And in many manners, the erosion continues to affect the biodiversity, the land degradation, and the greenhouse gas increase rapidly to reach, in April 2016, 470 ppm compared to 283 ppm in 1958. 20 years after the Earth Summit of Rio in 1992, and 40 years after the publication of the Meadows report, we can consider that the 3 conventions of Rio cannot be considered separately. The desertification is strongly linked to the climate change, and the biodiversity erosion cannot be considered without taking in account the global policy of habitat restoration. Those 3 conventions must be managed as a whole in a strong coherence linkage through an integrated approach. The autumn 2015 was an historical period with 2 major agreements. In September, the 17 goals of the Strategy 2030 of Sustainable Development, and the relevant 169 targets were applied in the General Assembly of the United Nations. The main target aims to build a program of sustainability in the Horizon 2030. The Conference of Parties, COP21, adopted in Paris, was a decisive agreement. 2 months later, the international community aimed to reduce the increasing of temperature less than 2 degrees, and when it's possible, 1.5 degrees. This was an historical turning point, a real diplomatic success. We use it to say that Paris was a COP of decisions, and the COP22 in Marrakesh in November 2016 will be the conference of implementation. Both aspects, mitigation and adaptation, are linked, and they are required to be implemented in a whole policy, taking into account the specific condition of each country and the scale of priority depending on the level of the nature of the vulnerability they are facing at. The climate change policy is linked to the new development models expected to be set up. In this regard, the implementation of Paris Agreement is connected to SDG. Even water is a transversal matter. In all the 17 goals at different levels, the target 13 underlined clearly we have to fight against climate change and against the impacts of climate change. The means at the same time, that means the same time mitigation and adaptation. But which approach to adopt? The appropriate approach is to learn from experiences of the past decades. We experienced the thematic approach dealing with water, energy, soil, and the second approach is the sectorial one, agriculture, industry, urbanization. but not enough the territorial approach or an ecosystemic approach. It appears that the thematic approach dealing with water, lands, energy generated, without any doubt, substantial results, so long that we were far away from the scarcity and different threats. The current situation allows no longer any linear approach. These natural resources were and remain the core of building the sectorial policies as agriculture, food security, tourism, urban development. But the sectorial policies, even with an internal coherence, raise a conflictual situation and increase intersectorial competition due to the scarcity of those resources. Therefore, the integration is not a sum up of sectorial policies. The sectorial policies have to emerge through an ecosystemic approach with the means of the policy based on the concept of sustainable zone, ecozone, or ecoregion. That means that we have to deal with the complexity, the permanent arbitration of different sectors based on reliable diagnosis of the available resources with the specific strengths and weaknesses, and overall the implication of all the actors at local, regional, and international levels. But how to go from decision to implementation from COP21 in Paris to COP22 in Marrakesh? 3 major leading axes have been considered. Mobilizing financing for adaptation, and the most expected decision by developing countries is to have a clear roadmap to mobilize $100 billion by 2020. The second one is strengthening partnerships to accelerate the transition towards a low emissions future, which requires a mechanism for strengthened capacity building, which is the core point of the NDC, to turn the NDC into national policies. And the third one is to implement and strengthen NDCs under the Paris Agreement. This is the linking point with the Global Climate Action Agenda. In this regard, the ongoing process on negotiation, the formal process, the mobilization through the informal process, and the mandated and special events will continue the 3 milestones to take Marrakesh a successful meeting, a successful conference. Water is a central issue in both the 17 goals of SDGs and the published NDC. Among the 83% published NDC related to the adaptation, 93% include water. Water appears as the first priority, not only for the sector of agriculture, health, or drinking water, but in terms of risk assessment and risk management. The African countries, Latin American, Caribbean, and Asian Pacific countries are the most concerned and the most demanding in this regard. As deliverable in Marrakesh, the decisions Paris Agreement in force in CMA and CMA1, and I think there is a good argument to hope that in Marrakesh, the ratification of Paris decision will be ratified with meeting the double criteria of 55%. There is also the loss and damage with the 5-year work plan to be received in Marrakesh. The capacity building, the committee achieving terms of reference, the framework, and the election of members of the Action Agenda Climate Finance. The political statements showcasing major programs for Africa facilitative dialogue, finance dialogue, a roadmap to achieve the $100 billion, and also the host country initiatives. The top of the priorities is to provide concrete, bankable projects on adaptation and mitigation. The AAA, Adaptation of Agriculture in Africa, is one of those initiatives, and in this regard, a concrete one to address at the same time the soil neutrality degradation, the Goal 13 for the SDGs, the food security, and the agricultural water management. We were very pleased to welcome you next November in Marrakesh to continue our commitment on our common concern and to make the meeting of Marrakesh a successful one by delivering concrete solutions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Lafay, and we look forward to close cooperation in advance and during the COP implementation conference you mentioned. Could you tell us, water will be a major part, I understand, of the COP22 in Marrakesh. Do you have some specific events that you're going to plan, or will it be part of the program overall? What is your idea about bringing water to Marrakesh?
I think Marrakesh has a long story with water. The World Water Council is born in Marrakesh in 1997. The COP7 was held in Marrakesh in 2001. And I think the logo too of Marrakesh, in the center of this logo you have the menorah, which is not only an historical monument but also the know-how of the traditional manner to manage the water scarcity. Water will be present in Marrakesh in COP22, the Blue Zone, to dedicate one day of discussing, I think, at the high-level session in the second week of the COP22. And I think in this day dedicated to water, we'll have maybe a very high discussion, not only for the COP22, but at the presidency of Morocco, which is till December 2017. Yes.
Thanks a lot. And just by coincidence, when I picked up my mail this morning, it is a weekly magazine in Sweden. They had an article about Marrakesh and water. So that is good in advance of the meeting. So thanks a lot, Dr. Lafay, and we look forward to the COP.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Now next, as I mentioned earlier on this morning, we will listen to some reflections and conclusions from the interregional dialogue. That is the dialogue in between the regional days, as we had this week, on Asia, Africa, and Latin America. So please, on stage, I would like to invite Pablo Bereciartua, Undersecretary for Water in Argentina, to give us those reflections. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody. I would like to share with you some of the conclusions and ideas of our discussion here. I also want to point out that it's been a very inspiring week, and I want to also highlight the level of organization and the possibility of networking that all these dialogues and the conclusions that I will be sharing with you allowed. So let me please start with a quick reflection. I'm here because I'm right now running a national water plan in Argentina. It's one of the main components of the new government of Argentina. It has started last December. So many of the discussions that I will be sharing with you and the conclusions are going to be very much useful to the implementation and delivery of our program in Argentina, which is very much aligned with the topics of this week here. So first of all, I would like to say that in our discussions, in the meetings that I was taking part of, and also in the ideas that the other people that were working as secretaries of these discussions shared with me, it was very, very clear that in order to achieve economic growth, water is a key issue. But also that we have to come up with a more integrated approach on how we deal with the water, and basically that we have plenty of information, but many times that information doesn't translate into key solutions and into useful policies. If we are very concrete, some of the discussion took us to the idea that when you don't have water, of course, in a proper approach and available, then you cannot be competitive. In Argentina, it's a good case of that. I will not go into details, but recently, in the last few years, we have had, and we are facing right now, mainly due to El Niño in some parts of the country, but also due to the lack of the water in the glaciers in the area of the Andes, and also in several issues of highly polluted water basins in highly populated places of the country. Some of the challenges are very clear. So as we know, we have the goals, and one of them is pointed towards water on a very straight basis, but as it was said here, one of the discussions took us to the conclusion that actually all of them are very much related to water, and water is a central issue. So I'm very glad to have heard just right now the level of attention that there will be to water in Marrakesh in the near future. And this is also some of the key points that were in our discussions during this week. So the second thing that I want to highlight is some of the key issues that we thought the World Water Week was playing and was making available to all of us. One of them is that we need to move into policy. In many senses, as I said before, there is already an agreement on what it is that has to be done, but not a delivery of that. So we tend to agree on the idea that we know that some concepts are key concepts and that we have to change the reality, but we are not very keen on achieving that. So we think that sharing information and also being as concrete as possible in that sense, this is to share what are the wrong experiences, how some of the policies failed, is also very, very useful. The other thing is that taking all these approaches to the different regions, we have to allow for different meanings. And not everybody has the same way of solving issues. So when we compare the different regions, there were different ideas on how to solve them. Of course, the main focus was Latin America, Asia, and Africa in all these conversations, and they face common problems, as you see here, but we agreed that those common problems turn out to be different challenges. Improved sanitation, as you see here, and wastewater treatment is is one of the key points in Latin America, which is a highly urbanized continent, as you know, but it is different, the approach that you need in Africa and Asia, where on-site sanitation and sludge management turn out to be key issues. All sectors require reform in order to achieve those targets, so we agreed for the most part that the political support, let's say, behind these changes is also key. And again, the issues that we discussed at international session on the policy challenges of implementing the Goal 6 were central. So finally, we wanted to address that, of course, we want to go for more basic services, but also we need water treatment, we need water security. It is water resources management as a whole which has to be changed. Public sector alone cannot achieve those developments, so here comes one of the main conclusions. We need the private sector to take part into the implementing and delivery of the sector. That is also very, very clear in the Argentinian case, where the plan that I am running is one of the main plans. Probably it is 1/3 of the investment in infrastructure in the country. But we know that if we want to achieve the goals, that is not going to be enough. And so the challenge is, how do you put together public-private partnerships so that the private sector can be a member of that, avoiding some of the failures that some of them were significant in the past. So we need to foster, as it says there, the businesses around the water and sanitation as a general, and to make it more clear. Then the other key conclusion, a second key conclusion, was that we need to move away from a linear approach. We need to be able to recognize complexity and to move into the circular economy. That is also a big challenge. Our governments are not designed to do that. They are designed in silos components, And it is not that easy to have the people to work together and policies that may be useful to allow the private sector to do some of the circular economy, but only if you set the rules and the proper rules to achieve that. And a third key conclusion is that we need to move into more of a green infrastructure approach. And we do know far more on nature than we used to know in the past. Also, there are plenty of technologies, mainly digital and Internet of Things and monitoring technologies that let you to dealing with the variability and uncertainty of nature. But once again, you need the institutions and the rules and the policies in order to do that. Very quickly, I want to share with you the main ideas of the Argentinian Water Plan, just as a case in which all these discussions can enrich the policy. So we have a plan in 4 main components. One of them is water supply and sanitation. So our goal is to reach 200% of water supply and 75% of sanitation. Argentina has now 80% of water supply and 50% of sanitation. And in order to do that, the plan requires an investment of $21 billion. The second point of the plan is to adapt the territory to the climate and to the climate variability and to the climate change. So Argentina is a very extended land, as you know, 5 million square kilometers, and it has all kinds of heterogeneities and diversities in the water access. Right now we have around 7 million hectares underwater, very productive area in the Pampas due to El Niño, but at the same time we are lacking water in several of the cities that are right next to the Andes. So our plan implies a $10 billion investment in order to do the infrastructure and also the technology to get to the data and to do the modeling and to be able to have early warning systems and so on. A third one is to do multi-purpose, large-scale infrastructure. And Argentina has not done that for a few decades. There are 2 or 3 of them that are key for developing, particularly in the arid and semi-arid area, and we are starting them. And a fourth one is to basically enlarge the agricultural area of the country by developing infrastructure in the boundaries of the agricultural area. And we are facing a challenge of around 800,000 hectares, which implies almost $4 billion US dollars in order to do so. So if we want to do that, and this is a priority for the current government, we need to take into account several of the ideas and discussions that we were paying attention to during these days. So let me just come to an end with what I think are the 3 main concepts of our discussions this week. Of course, we are working around the goals for 2030, and I just wanted to share with you some of the views of all of our discussions from my point of view, considering the Argentinian case. 3 key issues for me are outcomes of our week of work here. One of them is that we need to move into the circular economy. That is not easy, but it is key. And we need to do that sharing the possibility of including green infrastructure. So key issue here is how do you put together policies and frameworks so that green infrastructure is actually a good business and can be taken up by the private sector. A third one is this thing that I just said. Governments are not going to be enough. So even though Argentina has water as a key priority, if you run the numbers, you realize that governments are not going to be enough. And a fourth one has to do with us. What are you going to do to make it possible? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Undersecretary Bereciartua, for those reflections. And I take it more or less that we could turn to Argentina as a role model because you have all these outcomes of these sessions at your agenda, the green infrastructure, the circular economy, and public-private partnerships, and what can we do as human beings or as well as working in different capacities, be they private sector, civil society, or government. Now, next on our schedule is Dr. Torkel Jan-Clausen, the chairperson of the Scientific Program Committee of the World Water Week, who will share with us your outcome, or the outcome of the 8 full-day seminars. You have had a busy week, so please come on stage and share with us your reflections.
So this one here, right? Thank you very much, Torgny. And yes, we did indeed have a busy week. In fact, we had a busy year, because it takes a year to make these 8 seminars. And I have 15 minutes to tell you, not 16, 15, to tell you what happened. We had 8 seminars, and we prepared them over a year with 24 co-convening organizations. But Stockholm Water Week is scientifically based. We had more than 400 papers submitted to us, of which we could only invite 60 papers, abstract for papers, and 36 for posters. So we had that scientific input to the seminars. But then our co-conveners and others provided 30 great keynote speakers and some 30 panelists. And therefore, of course, we have a rich outcome. I can only touch the surface of it here, but there will be more in the reporting from the week. So let me just go quickly through the 8 seminars we had. The overall one was Water for Sustainable Growth, the theme of it. We talked about growth to water, and we talked about water to growth. Economies and populations grow, and so does assets and economic activity.